Hi folks, and welcome to On the Node. A quick apology. The first half of this episode is slightly echoey, particularly on Andy's side. That is because we neglected to pull the curtains, so we apologise for that, but halfway through the sound gets much better. Enjoy.
Oh, definitely fear.
Yeah.
It's fear of the unknown. You've not experienced it yet, so it's a case of you're kind of thinking, how bad is this going to be?
Hey, I'm Tom.
And I'm Andy.
And this is On the Node, a podcast about two best mates and one cancer journey. Andy, how are you, mate?
Pretty good. Just like our last recording, I'm enjoying my freedom before a long stay in hospital, so making the most of it.
Yeah, we are on a recording frenzy at the moment.
Yeah, just trying to build up a backlog of content so you guys keep up to date with On the Node while I'm locked away.
Yeah, for all the millions of fans that we have across the world, including Bermuda. What are we covering today, mate?
So we touched upon it a little bit with the first treatment episode, and also in our episode with Lan, we talked a little bit about side effects. But really, I think today we're going to do a bit more of a deep dive in terms of what those side effects look like, how we mitigated those as best we could, and what are the effects that I didn't get that some others do get with lymphoma treatment.
Amazing. Really looking forward to that, and obviously side effects from chemo are well documented, so looking forward to getting into that with you, mate. But before that, we have our first ever listener Q&A.
Wonderful.
Do you know what that means?
Question and answers.
Yeah, notwithstanding questions and answers, it means that people have gone out their way to submit questions both for you and even for me.
Well, thank you, audience, for submitting those. We'll probably do these again, hopefully with a bigger following, and people can answer questions from throughout the series about anything in our experience or about Tom's cricket career.
Yeah, which, funny you should say that. The first question is from Chloe. And Chloe's question is, I'm curious how you personally used to react to these types of things, bad news of others. If news ever made you feel either uncomfortable or just unsure of what to say. And I think we touched upon this I asked you a question about how you felt other people react to your diagnosis and whether you felt there was a bit of awkwardness on their part. I guess Chloe's asking that question of you.
Yeah, I think so too. So thanks, Chloe, for the question.
Thanks, Chloe.
I think it's a really interesting one, and it's definitely something that has changed over time. So I would say that if people came to me, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, with bad news, whether it's a difficult personal circumstance or an illness, something like that, I would probably get pretty awkward, and to be honest, I would say a bit British about it.
I was about to say the exact same thing.
A bit
white British bloke about it.
Yeah, a bit stoic, a bit, don't really know what to say, don't want to ask or say the wrong thing and so you sort of like tiptoe around a subject. I think that now, having been through this experience, I'd like to think I've grown in that side of things, and I'm much more empathetic and understanding of what people might go through, and that making sure that people have a regular check-in and are aware that there is an open dialogue available to them through me, then that they feel comfortable talking to me. But they might not want to talk to me today, but they know that they could reach out if they wanted to with that check-in, and I hope that people have experienced the same.
100%. Question 2 comes from Matthew Chappell. Now, for listeners who do not know who Matthew Chappell is, let me bring you to light, and obviously you to light, Andy. So Matthew Chappell is what other people might call a legend of Kowloon Cricket Club. He turns up for the Saturday Div 1 side that I play for. He bowls off spin rather effectively, increasingly effectively, and he's almost aged like a fine wine as it pertains to his cricket. But he's also an avid listener, and hence he's submitted a couple of questions. The first one, quote unquote, thanks chaps. Question for the likeable one, Andy. During chemotherapy, is the body capable of any level of exercise, or is it totally spent? And how long does it take to start to feel normal again after the treatment cycle ends? I also need to kind of make the point here that Chaps is an exercise fanatic, goes on 10k runs bare feet in Lama, just very, very holistic and very healthy. So no surprises his question is geared towards that.
Cool, thanks chaps. We'll get into a little bit of this later on in this episode, actually, when it comes to the side effect of fatigue and what does that mean. From a practical standpoint, I can exercise, but with limitations. So we've talked about this Hickman catheter I have on my chest, and it's basically an open wound with a cable coming out of it and the dressing. I can essentially sweat that dressing off.
And tell that story, the recent story.
Well, on Friday last week, I had to make a semi-emergency trip to the hospital to have my dressing redone because I'd been to the gym that morning.
You were lifting too heavy.
I'd been lifting too heavy, and I had been going to the gym like every day in my freedom to kind of exercise while I can. But essentially, when I got home that day, the dressing had come loose and had to be reapplied. And the risk is, if I don't get that done, I'll be exposed to bacteria essentially, and therefore infection. So it's a bit problematic and a bit challenging. In the context of barefoot 10k runs across Lama, I'm not doing any of those because I would instantly sweat it all off. I don't actually.
Not yet.
That's
a medium-term goal.
Not while I've got these in. So I don't really do any cardio in this period of time for that reason, but I try and stay as fit as I can. The other component is probably just the benefit of exercise during chemo, which I think we'll get to when we cover fatigue later.
Let's crack on with that later. And then Chaps also asked one for me. Thanks, Chaps. Have the lessons learned from Andy in making the podcast around things like resilience crossed over to benefit other domains in your life, such as sport? And by sport, you can read cricket. Please share examples ball by ball, ... Now, I must admit, this has coincided with some of the richest vein of form I've potentially ever had with a bat in hand, a cricket bat in hand. So I have been reflecting on that, and I think to answer the question in all its sincerity, I think inherently I'm quite a stubborn bloke. We've got this thing at KCC when we refer to each other as having minerals. I feel that innately I do have minerals, but I have felt very cognizant that actually one of your other pastimes in Hong Kong, aside from editing on the Node over the last few months, has been tuning in to watch me play as well, right?
Mostly because it's really good content to fall asleep to.
Very good. But there's an element there that I'm thinking, okay, hold on. Andy's laying there. I'm about to go and play cricket. He's tuning in. I can't play like a mug here. And actually, it's not even just the YouTube stuff, which you've done both with commentary and without commentary. That's watching cricket without commentary on YouTube is inane in the extreme, but you've gone even further and almost found HongKongCricket.com, whatever it is, and you're refreshing scores when there is no YouTube technology available. So
yeah, that's for your B League side.
Yeah. Sunday Div 2, nothing wrong with that. But I think feeling that and knowing that you're watching, there is an element of not wanting to let you down, I suppose.
No ducks here.
Yeah, 0 ducks given.
Very good.
Yeah, very good. So I think to answer the question in its sincerity, I think there is an element that's transcended, but there's an element that is innate as well.
It sounds to me that rather than resilience, it's more because you've got an audience watching, you've got the pressure on.
As I always say, all I need is a gallery.
Good.
Right,
Back
anyway.
to our usual programme.
Back to BAU. That is the end of Q&A. Thank you, Chloe, and thank you, chaps. And we invite our listeners to, continue to post questions, probably mainly of Andy, but I'm also amenable to the old question. Right, so, side effects. What, I guess, mentally, everyone knows there are side effects, and I suppose step one is preparing yourself, and almost maybe not even preparing, fearing about what those might be. Like, tell us about that mindset that you're in prior to even the chemo starting.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest components of anxiety, I think, before starting treatment. So obviously we've talked about that sort of reaction to getting the diagnosis, and we've talked about making the plan, and actually we've talked about the going through that first chemo. But it's a case of you're expecting very physical changes that are something that you may not have experienced before. There's the obvious one of hair loss and things like that. So that's a very sort of like physical appearance based change. But then there's other sort of, I'll call them stereotypes in terms of what our preconceptions are of chemotherapy before you've gone through it, of nausea and a lot of vomiting and things like that. And you it's pretty impossible to avoid reading about side effects online.
I was going to ask that. Are you proactively researching, or is it you're looking at the treatment that you're getting and then there's a subsection in an article that then freaks you out?
Yeah, I think to be honest, I think it's actually one of the things that can help prepare you mentally for it. But there are websites like the NHS, like Macmillan Cancer Support, and I'm sure depending on other geographies around the world, there are other options to look at. But when you kind of look up AAVD chemo, it talks to you about what the drugs are, and it talks to you about what the common side effects are. So you kind of prepare yourself about what you're going to expect before you go into that treatment, and it's a big part of the journey.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And what is the overriding emotion through that preparation, would you say?
Oh, definitely fear.
Yeah.
It's fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
You've not experienced it yet, so it's a case of you're kind of thinking, how bad is this going to be?
Yeah.
Is it going to be truly awful? And you can go down rabbit holes, like reading on Reddit other patients' experiences and interpretations of that experience, and that can send you in a darker place of fear than perhaps just the facts of this may or may not happen. And I think it's just a case of how many of these am I going to experience, and how bad are they going to be?
Got it. So that's the mental side of getting ready to face this, this chemo demon. And then it comes to actually facing it and the chronology of the side effects. So what is the chronology? Like, what is the first thing you feel?
Interesting. So the first one that is really noticeable was that first night after the chemo. So the infusion was that evening, and we talked about last time that I spent that night in hospital. Basically, I woke up in the middle of the night in what can only be described as a swimming pool of sweat.
Sweaty Betty.
It was absolutely revolting. I was just completely drenched out of nowhere, wasn't really expecting it. But that's what happened. But the interesting thing is the next morning, the doctor told me that it was a good thing.
Yeah.
And that it showed that the chemo was working.
And we don't know the physiological reason why one might sweat a bucket load.
I could theorize, but
Okay.
no, I believe it's to do with the breakdown of cancer cells in your body.
Fine.
But I am not truly versed in
And
it.
we are not a science podcast.
Absolutely
after
not.
all. Okay, so sweat. What comes next?
Nausea. So with nausea, this is one that I think everyone anticipates from chemotherapy, and I certainly kind of felt it during the infusion and later that evening, but it really hit the hardest the day after the infusion.
Anything that you can do to mitigate against that?
Yeah, so we talked last time about the day of the infusion, I had the dexamethasone injection, and then they also give me 2 pills. So one is called Emend and one is called Zofran. So you take both of those before your infusion.
That goes into the Hickman?
No, that's a pill.
Okay,
It's
fine.
a pill. And I think you get one Zofran to take that night
Okay.
at home. And then essentially you then get 2 more days of Emend to take when you get out of hospital, or the 2 days after infusion, however, wherever you're physically based. But then they give you Zofran for as much as you need. But I generally tried to wean myself off that after 2 or 3 days.
And we come on to why in a moment, right?
Yes, yeah, we'll get into why I did that, yeah.
Got it. So you've got sweating, nausea, a couple of good ones to start with.
Yeah. Oh, but on the nausea, just to kind of cover off though, the important thing is that, one of the stereotypes and one of the sort of fears I had going into chemotherapy is that I would just be perpetually vomiting everywhere.
Yeah.
But throughout the whole of my cancer treatment, both back in 2023 and to this date, and touch wood it stays this way, I have never vomited,
Happy days.
which is a pretty good result. And
But
I know
you've still felt it. You've just never
you feel
actually
it, and
physically.
you feel it in your mouth. You're like, oh, I kind of want to, but it's like something's holding it back. It's really weird. It's a really weird sensation. But you know that if it wasn't for the medication, you'd probably feel a lot worse.
Yeah, I bet. Okay, so we've had sweat, we've had nausea. I guess, again, chronologically, what comes next?
Well, if you remember from when you visited me, you probably witnessed this firsthand.
100%. I'll
And-
tell that story again in a moment.
But the one that is the most debilitating symptom, or for me it was, and I found it the most challenging one to kind of live with, was the fatigue. There is no way I can articulate how tired and what that tiredness feels like. It's not like being sleepy, and it's not really like a flu tired, and it's not like a hangover tired. It's a whole own kettle of fish. It's just so horrible. Is
Pure
the-
fatigue.
Yeah, you just like getting off the sofa is a task.
Yeah. And when does that onset? When does that come about?
So it would normally be for me at least, not the day after the infusion, the day after that. So T plus 2 or
T
whatever.
plus 2, yeah.
And it would kind of, you'd wake up in that morning and just not want to do anything.
Yeah. So going back to the point that you made, when I came to visit you in April, I think I talked about this in one of the other episodes. We went for lunch and you seemed broadly okay. And then I think I had to head to the Apple store or something. And we were walking together. And then all of a sudden you're like, I need to go home. I'm crashing here. So does it just hit you like a tidal wave?
So there's kind of 2 components to it. So there's a couple of days where you just don't even want to leave the house. You don't want to do anything. And I never would meet a friend for lunch or anything like that. But there are days where you feel better, you start improving, and this is probably day 4, 5, maybe 6. And actually, even into the second week, this can sometimes happen. And essentially, you would be out and about doing something, and you'd feel okay, and then all of a sudden, as you described, it hits you like a wave.
Yeah.
You just have this sudden plummet of energy that is quite hard to describe. And I would go home on days like that, or if I was already home, I would retire to bed and just go and sleep for 2, 3, even 4 hours, and still that evening have a perfectly normal long night's sleep.
Yeah.
And I think you probably noticed at that time the most sort of the giveaway and my telltale sign for when I know it's hitting me is I might still be physically able to walk around or whatever.
I know what you're about to say.
But the projection in my voice
Yeah.
just disappears. It just completely wanes. And for our audience, they're probably watching this and thinking, oh, but Andy seems fine when he's on this podcast. His voice has some life to it.
Yeah.
But we film these when I'm on my better days.
Yeah.
And at the moment I'm thankfully in a period of the cycle where I'm pretty healthy and we can film quite a few in quite short succession. But if it's straight after chemo, there's a good 3, 4, 5 day period where I'm so wiped out. There is no way I can't even focus on anything. The fatigue is so hard sometimes that even you don't even watch Netflix. You can't focus on anything.
Yeah.
And I find myself laying in a hospital bed or laying at home, just staring into space.
Anything at all that can be done to counteract that or not?
So that actually goes back to Chaps' question about exercise. The benefit of exercise is that it should mitigate the fatigue, and it doesn't really make you feel better. The days, day T like T+2, T+3, I'm still going to feel really rotten.
Yeah.
Even if I'm out and about, getting my heart rate up, just walking around the neighborhood. But it does help you recover from it quicker. And by that I mean, if I'm exercising even very light exercise, I might recover from the fatigue by day T+5 or 6. If I'm not active, if I am just lying flat on the bed, that could extend to day 7 or 8, maybe even 9. So it's important to exercise for that reason. You're still going to feel rubbish, and you can't avoid it, but it might shorten that experience, or at least that's what it was for me.
That's really interesting. I wonder if there's an element of endorphin as well. I know you're feeling awful, but I'm, as you know, a massive advocate for exercise and the way it makes you feel. So I also wonder whether there's something subconscious there. Okay, so that is fatigue. I guess what else? There must be other things that over the course of a chemo cycle kind of come up.
Yeah. So there's one that is, the potentially deadly one.
Yeah.
Not to be over melodramatic.
Yeah, not at all. You've not.
I'll start with the word deadly. But the reason I use that term is that I was once hospitalised. It was actually after my first cycle.
I remember this.
Where the doctors are kind of learning how your body reacts to the chemotherapy.
Yeah.
And I did my blood test, and I went in for my sort of day 4 checkup after the chemotherapy, and I'd been home for a couple of days, and the doctor basically goes, I think he phoned me up, because I did my blood test that morning, was supposed to see him the next day, and he phoned me up and he goes, "Where are you now?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm at home." He goes, "Where's home?" And I told him where I lived, and he goes, "I need you to come to my office right now and then go straight to hospital."
Wow.
And we got to his office, and he essentially told me that my white blood cells were life-threateningly low, and that's a condition called neutropenia, or you're neutropenic.
Yeah.
And essentially you are low in a type of white blood cell called neutrophils, and it essentially leaves you incredibly vulnerable to any kind of infection or anything like that, as I've just experienced with my stem cell harvest, which was in our bonus episode.
Anything that can be done to mitigate against being neutropenic?
Yes, so much like when I was just in for my stem cell harvest and they were sort of stimulating the bone marrow, they give me these booster injections, and so from the second cycle, they were giving me those injections early, from day 2. Essentially, I was having these injections, and they're subcutaneous injections, so
straight into the rig.
Yeah, I administered them myself, or Lan administers them straight into my tummy, around the tummy button, basically. So I end up with a bunch of red dots,
lovely
bruises, and all sorts from these little needles. But yeah, you give those once or twice a day until your cell counts are back up.
And they also have side effects, no?
Yeah, bone pain.
Excellent.
Which can be excruciating, but for the most part, it's okay. It can just be managed with paracetamol.
Yeah, and you talked about exercise. You talked about the importance of your morning walks, etc. Any mobility issues that you face through this whole process?
So there is another side effect that is called peripheral neuropathy, which is essentially nerve damage to your extremities. It's the simplest way to describe it. So it's generally fingertips and toes, and then spreading into your hands and your feet more broadly. It can be anything from a very light tingling to pins and needles to complete numbness, and in the extreme cases, dexterity issues in your hands, like the ability to grip and things like that. For me, that was an effect that still lives with me, is one way to put it. So
even after physio and stuff like that?
Yeah, so it started off, with just in my hands pretty lightly, and in my feet. The hands recovered fully after treatment, but my feet are still pretty numb, especially my left foot, bizarrely. And so I started off recovery with, like when I finished treatment, with a personal trainer, and then I did physio, and the physiotherapist has tried acupuncture, stretching, and even electrotherapy. So I've done all sorts of things to try and make it as better as good as it can be.
Right. Got it. So those side effects that you've all listed, are they kind of localized in the sense that you have a cycle, you get them, and it's the same, or do they get worse over time, as it were?
So the cycles themselves are pretty isolated. So as I mentioned, by the end of it, you're feeling nearly 100%. You feel pretty energetic and pretty normal. But there is a cumulative effect. So the fatigue, generally, I think it hit harder later on. When I sort of got through cycles, cycles 4, 5, 6 was harder than cycles 1, 2, and 3. And the neuropathy is the one that really accumulates to the point where they actually lowered my dose of one of the chemo drugs later on in the cycle, because I think it was from sort of cycle 5 and 6. So those last 4 infusions, they lowered the dose of Adcetris, because that's the one that causes the most significant neuropathy. And it was getting bad to the point where the numbness in my feet was making me almost fall over when I was walking around.
Bloody hell.
Combined with the fatigue, of course, I was if you're a combination of being really tired and not being able to feel your feet is a recipe for disaster when you're trying to be mobile and get some exercise in.
Correct. And look, I think we'll talk about mental side effects soon enough, but obviously what you've just described there is purely physical, but I can't imagine the feeling of not being able to walk properly.
Yeah.
Particularly conducive to a happy mindset.
Yeah, I think, I was, 30 at the time. I think I just turned 30 when I was ill the first time. So to all of a sudden feel so weak. And it's, like I said, it's a combination of that fatigue and the neuropathy. to not feel as mobile is not a great feeling. It's not a big motivator, but the thing that sticks in the back of your mind to kind of get you through it is, this is only temporary.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get to the other side of this.
Cool. So that, I think, is all the side effects you did get.
The main ones that I can
Main
remember
ones.
anyway.
Excellent. Were there any that you didn't get that you were worried that you might?
Yeah. And I think it's a good time to reference Hank Green again, a content creator on YouTube. His video actually educated me on side effects because he had different ones to me. So he absolutely had the fatigue, and he said that was the thing that hit him the hardest. Just like, to be honest, on reflection, that's what hit me the hardest. But he had a number of other ones that I was fortunate not to get. The one that is potentially on my horizon for next week with my next phase of treatment is called mucositis. So mucositis is essentially the breakdown of mucus tissues in your body, and that can be anywhere from your mouth, so it affects your sort of swallowing and things like that, makes eating and drinking very painful, and also in through your digestive system, and can make, can cause you all sorts of upset stomachs and things like that. So hopefully I won't get that, and won't be able to talk about it in future, but that's a big one. The other two that I remember him talking about that surprised me, because to be honest, they hadn't come up high on my list when I was sort of doing Dr. Google stuff earlier that we talked about, was he had sort of debilitating headaches and migraines. I think he called it like an optical headache, and it was essentially triggered by bright lights and vision and stuff. So it's much like migraine type symptoms. So I didn't have any of that, thankfully. And then the third one, which I thought was really weird, he thought it was weird, and again, it wasn't something I heard of, but was urethra pain. And that's essentially, it feels a bit like a urinary tract infection, so I guess burning, stinging type sensations.
I've never had one,
but it's not one of those. Even if you're neutropenic and you think you might have a UTI, it's probably unlikely that that's what it is. It could just be a side effect. It could just be the chemo. The chemo is doing so much damage to your body that if peeing burns. But again, thankfully, I didn't have that. So.
And again, hopefully, you're not going to get it next week.
Correct.
Okay, so I mean, for the ultra observant of our listeners / watchers, they'll have noticed that we haven't talked about, I suppose, the main side effect. Why don't you kind of tell us, obviously, what it is, but also why we haven't focused on it in this particular episode?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the main side effect, but it's certainly the one that if you look at a person, you go, oh, they might have something wrong with them. And that is hair loss. Yeah. So we won't cover it in too much detail now, because I think it's such a broad and important topic for people who go through cancer treatment. And it's not just lymphoma; it's a lot of chemotherapies and other treatments. And because it's such both a physical journey in terms of what you look like, but also a mental journey. There are decisions to be made throughout that, so I think we should do a separate episode to talk about it, and I hopefully our audience find that interesting. But in answer to your question, and obviously under the hat there is a lack of hair,
under the lid,
but I can reveal to the audience that
exclusive,
news,
an on the node exclusive,
news breaking here, a couple of years late, but I experienced full body hair loss.
Full body.
And we won't do a reveal of that, because that would probably
get us banned. That would get us shadow banned.
We'd immediately be taken off YouTube
and potentially put somewhere else.
Yeah, correct. But essentially, I had full body hair loss that first time around. Interestingly, this time round, not full body.
No, not full body. Well, I can see a bit of hair on your arm there.
Yeah, I have blonde hairs
Yeah.
that are hard to see anyway. But yeah, I haven't had the same experience this time around. But first time round with AAVD, nothing left.
Got it. Cool. So I think we've covered everything, right? This set?
Yeah, for side effects. So I think next time, as you touched upon, we want to talk about the mental journey of going through chemotherapy, and what were my motivations that got me through it, what were the challenges, and that kind of thing.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to that, mate. Probably record it in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, probably.
Right. I'm Tom.
And I'm Andy.
And that was On the Node. Make sure you subscribe, like, follow on Instagram, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere, frankly. And you'll hear from us, hopefully, most weeks. Cheers.
Thanks for listening and hearing all about my journey with chemo side effects. We all know that this sounds very serious or even scary here, but for those of you who are going through treatment, about to start treatment, or just simply come across our content in their research, please remember that side effects in chemo have all been very well documented, studied, researched, and your medical team have all the tools to mitigate those side effects and make you feel as comfortable as possible. So remember to advocate for yourself, communicate your needs, and if I've learned anything from this experience, it's that cancer treatment is temporary. We'll get through it together.